B-A-T. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. I almost said Travis and Ben, but it's Ben and Travis. His name is at the top of the page. And we are excited today to have Loresa Stansell with us to talk a little bit about as we approach Autism Awareness Day. We're going to be talking a little bit about that right after these important messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis is brought to you by the Always Endure Slawburger Chase 5K and 10K on Saturday, April 15th, starting at the Bank of Lincoln County in Fayetteville, Tennessee at 8 a.m. By registering, you are supporting the mission of Always Endure to remove financial barriers for adoptive families, barriers to care for patients enduring major medical diagnosis, and barriers to placement for children in foster care. You can register at alwaysendure.com by clicking on the Events tab at the top of the page. I'm Travis Creasy. That's All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes.
What's happening? Always good to be here with all of you people, especially when we have a great guest on. And that guy over there is Will Mahan.
Hey, well, what's up, fellas? Hope that y'all are having a good spring break. Well, spring break for me and you, Ben. I don't know about Travis, but just enjoying some time with the family and excited to get into our topic for today. I know it's going to be really beneficial to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're having SATs, so I'm spending a lot of time outside because when I finally get middle schoolers, we go outside and enjoy the sunshine. So sort of like spring break, yet not. As I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be talking about autism in this episode, and it is Autism Awareness Day, April 2nd, and then the whole month of April is Awareness Month, and we are so blessed to have Loresa Stansell with us, and we're so thankful to have you with us. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to spend with us goons on here on this podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I can remember way back in the day, Loresa and I were going to North Alabama together and getting our master's degree together, I believe. And it feels like it hasn't been that long ago. And then it kind of feels like it's been forever ago. So glad to be able to spend a little extra time with you today.
Same. It goes by so quickly.
I was actually feeling bad. You said All-Pro Counselor Ben Hayes like you usually do, and I don't feel like the All-Pro in this bunch. I feel like I'm going to bow out to Miss Stansell on this one because she's absolutely amazing. She has a TED Talk. I don't have a TED Talk. She's got a TED Talk. So I feel like that puts her in a different class. So.
And we'll certainly put that in the description. We'll stop talking. We're preachers and ministers, and so we talk a lot, but we're going to stop and let you tell your story.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, my connection, I have a son who just turned 30. Makes me feel really old, but he was diagnosed with autism at 4.5. And it was really a roller coaster ride for many years. And when I was in grad school, I was really struggling with grief. And I didn't really know how to express it. And I knew there had to have been other parents who were experiencing what I felt. And so I actually did a research paper on counseling families with special needs children. And what I learned is there was no mental health grief model for these families or this type of grief. And the grief is very different because we're not grieving because of our children. We love our children. Like, our children are the best. I know I'm biased, but I've never grieved because of my son. I love him dearly. But it is the loss of a familiar life script that we think that we're going to carry out with everyone else, you know? You buy all the parenting books and you have the baby and you expect them to walk and talk and do all the normal things that happen. And when that derails, it really kind of leaves you at this place where you just don't psychologically know where to land. And so I became very passionate about reaching out and helping other parents. And that led to a book. I did a grief model in 2011 and had it copyrighted. And then I published a book in 2017 called No More Chasing Normal to help parents really be able to talk through it, that, there shouldn't be shame associated with it. And it was also a journey of faith for me because I am a person of faith, and faith was such a big part of my life. And if I'm being really honest, as I promised God I would be, it was really, I struggled because I went through years that I felt like, God, why? Why is this happening? I kind of felt abandoned, even though I know he didn't abandon me, but that's what it felt like for me. And so kind of now I'm working on a second book, which is to help people who are believers really reconcile some of that, because the truth is God is good. He is faithful. He is sovereign. You can trust him. And this journey has brought me to a much deeper place of faith. And so that's sort of, I'm equally passionate about that as well as autism and helping parents.
The cyclical grief that you talk about in the book, I'm sure, haven't read the book, but I'm going to get it. And in the TED Talk, talk a little bit more about that and maybe how that played out and how that model works. Just kind of explain that if you can.
Absolutely. There's some similarity to grief models that have to do with death. One of the big differences is the loss of normal and the atypical. It's called atypical cyclical grief. And I named it atypical because it's atypical. It's not the typical grief. And, you go through this phase of denial, which is common in grief when someone dies, especially if they die suddenly. But this denial can look different because when your children are growing, and they might have a progression or a regression. And so denial, they can look normal one day, and then the other day, maybe not, and so denial can last longer, which is pretty pivotal because it can cost early intervention. And that is really important. So helping parents understand that it's better to err on the side of let's get this checked out, because if we do, then we can kind of take action and start working to help our child. And then you go through this phase of anger. I felt slighted. Like my son had been cheated, really. And like I had been cheated out of, all the fun little cute conversations you have with 4-year-olds or 5-year-olds and the T-ball. And, our life became consumed with therapies and, stuff that was very non-typical. And, guilt, guilt was, I found that to be very unique because I actually felt guilty for grieving over the loss of normal for my son because it made me somehow feel like I was being a bad mom. And the truth was, like I said, I didn't grieve him. I loved him. It was trying to plug him into a world that he didn't fit, and all of the things that came along with that. And so trying to reconcile that. Another thing that happens in that atypical cyclic grief, what the research has shown, is that parents can sometimes feel grief or guilt associated with causation. Like, did I do something in pregnancy? Did I do something right? Did I do something that caused this? And that can lead to unhealthy parenting, like overcompensating, etc. And then I talk about emotional conflict. And I really did have to kind of live this. This is unique. This is unique to my model. But it's the secondary injuries that happen in society. And what I mean by that, here's the best example I can give you. When Jacob was about 5 years old, and it was shortly after the diagnosis, and a really good friend of mine said to me, I'm so proud of how you're handling this and, everything you're doing for Jacob. I don't know what I would do if that happened to my children. I've been blessed with 2 healthy children. And my reaction, I know she did not mean it in any way, but what I heard is I wasn't blessed. My son wasn't blessed, right? Do you see where I'm going with that? And she meant nothing by it. But many parents that I've talked with, people will say things and they mean it to be kind sometimes, but it stings. And so helping parents work through those things, those secondary, the challenges, it might also be going to the grocery store. If you have a child that's having a meltdown constantly, that's very challenging. And when you feel like you're being judged or people are staring at you, that's really uncomfortable. And that also causes emotional conflict, which leads people to isolation. It's easier to stay home. And really, that is how it feels. But we all know that isolation is going to lead to depression. And so you can have periods where you feel really hopeless, like, where's this going? What's this going to be like? And then the unique yo-yo aspect to this model is you'll like Jacob would hit some major advancements. And I would think, yes, we're getting close. We've nailed it. And I would get this renewed sense of hope, like we're almost close to normal. He can maybe have a normal life. And then there would be this huge either regression, or I would realize his peers were doing something that was years ahead, and it shined a spotlight. And so then you just kind of loop back through because you realize it's an unmet milestone. So there's this yo-yo, this psychological yo-yo that goes throughout the lifespan. And my goal was to really help parents work through that, know it's coming, and be able to talk about it and maybe even prepare. Because the whole point of the model is you can't really, accepting is difficult because there's nothing final. There's no finality. Yeah. It might look final. The diagnosis looks final. But when people, as long as they're alive, they're going to be changing. Yeah. And so psychologically, you're trying to emotionally adjust. So you have this ebb and flow with people. And what I teach people is they've got to learn to redefine their own normal. They have a normal. I had a normal. And I had to get out of that comparison box to the normal, right? And start really embracing the life we had and the beauty that was in it. And man, when I turned that corner and learned how to start doing that and doing it well, it was so pivotal for me.
I can remember my older brother has cerebral palsy. And so first few years, he looked just like anybody else. We've got pictures that you would never guess. And so the staring, I get that, right? Everywhere. And when I was a kid, I took more issue with it than he did. He didn't. It was for him. But I think sometimes people forget that in your friend, that you're feeling it for them, whether he ever recognizes that people are staring or not.
Yes, that's exactly right. And it's so, what I have found is it's so validating for parents and even siblings when they read through the model or we talk about it, because it's really things they've already experienced. It's just now there's a name on it. Ben, you'll probably remember this from school, but one of the things I've talked about in interviews is this principle of universality. Dr. Yalom, he created it. And it's this principle that it's like support groups. People feel better when they learn they're not alone in their issues. And so, we've got AA, we've got all kind of support groups, and that's why they draw people, because it makes you feel better. Well, that was the point of this model and the book, and trying to really kind of maybe just set a standard or be able to give people the opportunity to talk about it without feeling shame. It's in Western culture. I don't really talk about this in the TED Talk, but it's in my research. I've done research through the years about this. And in Western culture, we like to celebrate the wins, and that's wonderful. But if you think about it, it almost makes it feel taboo to talk about the grief or the losses. Like somehow we're undervaluing our kids, and we're not. That's not the point. People are missing the point if that's how they feel, because it's not about that. It's, you guys know your parents, right? And so we have this script we develop, this schema as we go through life and we're growing up, and it's what we all tend to expect when we have children. And to think that you wouldn't have a grief response to that is really quite silly to me. And so I hope that my efforts will give people a lot more permission to talk about it and normalize it. Isn't that funny? I want to normalize, no more chasing normal.
Well, and I think it's going to, and it sounds like some amazing research and a lot of good stuff. And we've talked on here several times about what not to say when people are grieving, and and we've addressed that on several occasions with loss.
Yes.
And we've all experienced it in different ways. But I thought that it was a very interesting take on, and when you said that in your TED talk about the finality, you never really get that. It's just, I mean, all grief has sort of a cyclical nature, but there is at least kind of a finality to most of it. And when you're dealing with autism or cerebral palsy or other things like that, where there's not a finality necessarily. And so, learning to see the beauty in those lives and in what they do, and Bradley, Travis's brother, has just always been a light in the world, and we have learned to celebrate it and learn to laugh with him and cry with him and do all the things and experience life in his eyes. And he was always the driver because he had the wheels, and so we would just ride on his wheelchair with him.
My wife is a special education teacher, so first thing I want to say is thank you for what you're doing, because I see how much it can benefit families just through kind of the eyes of what my wife does day in and day out. But being a person of faith, as you have mentioned, what I want to know is, what can churches do better? What can Christians do better for families that may find themselves in the same situation that your family found itself, 26, 27 years ago, to better support? Because it seems some churches, congregations do it well. I think they're few and far between. And it's becoming more prevalent that churches need to be focusing on it. So just from a faith aspect, what can we do better to support and be there, through this journey, I guess is what we could say.
That is an amazing question. And I would answer it this way. I think that we as the faith community need to make sure that we create inclusive environments, because when Jacob was young and he had some challenging behaviors, there was a time that we couldn't take him to church. And it wasn't because we didn't want to go. It wasn't that at all. There just wasn't anywhere to take him. And you have families who are isolated who want to be in church, but there's not a room, a Sunday school, or people there that can attend to their child while they're in church. So that would be number one, would be making it more accessible. And the other, I think, would be not, and you guys have probably already covered this, but we want to support and not minimize. And so what that looks like is I don't believe God makes mistakes. I don't. I do believe we live in a sin-fallen world. And because of that, there are things that are going to happen, like sickness, disease, right? You fill in the blanks. And, sometimes, even though God does have a plan, and he does, I believe that with all of my heart, but using these, what I call professional Christian quotes, can almost feel like it stings a little, almost like God did this to you, and now you have to deal with it. And I don't think that's it at all. We have always been the cross, right? When sin came into the world, God had a plan, and that was the cross. And, ultimately we will all be restored. And I believe that, right? If you believe in the name of Jesus Christ, then, right, I'm not here to preach, but you get where I'm going with that. But I think that, as believers, as society, and then as churches, we've got to make places where these families feel included. They feel welcomed. They don't feel minimized. They don't feel like they have to hear, well, God, just hang in there. God's got a plan. It's what can we do? See, that question you asked, that's what should be being asked. What can we do? What do you need? How can we help you? Right? Because I think if we look at the two greatest commandments, which is what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. If we're going to love our neighbor as ourselves, that means we're going to come alongside, and we're going to support, and we're going to open churches. So did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. Well,
okay.
And I think it's easy for us at times, I think as ministers, to say, hey, we need to go out and we need to help. It hits different when someone has been on that journey, is experiencing those things, and they say, hey, like, it is real, that there is things that need to happen. And so I appreciate what you said perfectly.
So I mentioned earlier that we were at UNA together. We got our master's degree around the same time. I've been practicing sort of part-time in counseling for several years since then. And I know you have been too. So you've been practicing full-time. You are in it all the time. And so I just wanted you to kind of catch us up. Tell us a little bit about your work, what you do. I know you're a great asset to the Florence community. And so just give us a little insight into what you do.
So I went into private practice in 2012. So I've been doing that now for a little over 10 years, coming up on 11 years. And, I serve a wide client base, but I would say particularly I work with a lot of anxiety, depression. I do that full time. So I run a full-time practice. And I also have a very large faith-based client base, which is really cool for me because that's kind of at the heart for me, right? I love to do that. But I will say that what I encountered in my journey, my faith journey with Jacob was, I really felt like God had disappointed me or, had abandoned me, and my prayers were not answered. I didn't understand why God wasn't making things better. It just seemed to be getting worse. But I hid those feelings. And I hid them because I was ashamed of them. Like, I just didn't think that was a good Christian shouldn't think that way. And through the years in my practice, I have encountered person after person after person who feels upset with God, but they don't know how to express it. And people walk away from their faith because they feel like God somehow disappointed them. And I went to a youth conference. You guys will appreciate this. And my husband and I, we had to go because Jacob went, so we had to go as parent chaperones. And I was really feeling very conflicted because partly on the inside, I felt a little bit like a fraud. I knew I had some walls up. I never stopped believing. Don't get me wrong. I didn't never walk away from God, but I was struggling, in my relationship. And I am telling you, it felt like God was speaking directly to me. And to keep it short, the tagline that sent me over the edge was this. He said, "When did the cross stop being enough for you?" And it was like God hit me with a lightning bolt, because I knew in that moment that my son, who I'd been praying for, he was not the one who needed to be healed. I did. My heart was broken. I needed reconciliation with Christ, and it happened. And it was so amazing. And the grief model was written like 6 months later. And so I've had this incredible journey, and my heart of hearts, and I promise God that, God, I will be transparent. And I will put something out there if you open the doors. And so that segues into a manuscript I'm currently working on. I hope it will be published by the end of this year or beginning of next. And the title of the book is God's Expectations. And what it's about is it's a deep dive study to help people learn what is it that they are holding God accountable for. Right? Like, did God really promise that? Because here's my example. I'll hear people all the time that'll come in my practice and they'll be really upset because they feel like God is supposed to give them all the desires of their heart. Well, that's Jeremiah 29, right? But how they interpret that is whatever they desire, God's going to give them. And that is not, God doesn't say, he never says, hey, if you want a new car, I'm going to give it to you, right? That's not how that works. But people get injured because of that. So the book is really to help people understand scripture better, understand, like, are we holding God accountable and holding him to expectations that we shouldn't be holding him to? He's God. We're not, right? The cross is enough. And we can live in this place of trust, of full surrender. You should pray, and I believe we should pray. And God does care about every detail. But we also have to pray and submit to God's sovereignty. And so really helping people who've been spiritually injured or feel injured to get to a place of healing and reconciliation in their relationship with God.
You've got Travis in a groove right now. He is pumped up and excited. I can see
I'm
it.
so excited. Such a passion.
So two things about that. We've talked about on here before, guys, about expectation versus reality, and where when we have an expectation and then reality comes up a little bit short, that gap in between's frustration, anger, whatever. And I've told a lot of clients through the years that have struggled with these things. I've said, God is big enough to handle your anger. It's okay. Like, it's fine to be angry with him. He just wants you to bring the anger to him instead of run away from him. And
that's right.
I think that's one of those skits, Travis, that we did with SWAT, that, when you're a kid and you get hurt, you run to your parents. Even if you did something wrong, you run to your parents and go, I've got something. And somewhere along the line in the garden, I guess, we decided, when we get hurt by sin, we run away from him. And he's the one we really should be running to. So
absolutely.
Really good stuff.
Absolutely. Well, here's the part I think you guys will really love is the book is actually written in a small group study format. Sweet. So I've written it so that it can be used in churches across America to really help believers, and so that we can embrace this openly and talk about it instead of people having to feel isolated and putting on the mask when they go to church, right? I mean, I believe we should live authentically before our God and authentically with each other.
Yeah.
We've
been studying Hebrews, and that's where in that verse he talks about the love of money and being content, and then he follows it up with, because basically what you're saying, the cross is enough. Jesus said, "I will never leave you, never forsake you." Like that's what we should have contentment with. But as I mentioned earlier, my brother has cerebral palsy. We have tons of stories, funny stories, right? Because we have pomp and circumstance. We have rules that we play by society. And then you have these awesome kiddos who come along and they go, we don't play by your rules.
Right.
And so I'm sure that you have a ton of funny stories to share. Can you pick one to share with the audience?
Yes. Well, this one, I'll share two real quick. So we took him to Six Flags. He was probably about 10 or 11. And there's a really tall slide straight down, and he was such an adrenaline junkie. So he had climbed those stairs several times. Well, he got about halfway up on the third time, and he stops, and he says, he's out of gas. Out of gas. Because he knew we'd have to put gas in the vehicle when it's out. So he used that. That was so cute. And the other just happened the other day, which goes to show it never goes away. But a dear friend that actually graduated with Ben and I, Krissa, we are still in contact. And she came in the house, and I had not seen her for a few weeks. And I said, aren't you a sight for sore eyes? And she goes over to hug Jacob, and he says, what's wrong with your eyes? Like very literal, You know, he took that as something's wrong with her eyes. And so we had to explain that. But it's just those little chuckles, you know, those moments that instead of being worried or upset, you learn to laugh and enjoy it, you know, not laughing at him, but laughing with him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And you sometimes have to just laugh, you know, to get through some of the difficult things that you have to deal with. And that's across the board. My dad's dealing with dementia right now. And, you know, there's times when we're just laughing at some of the things just because we want to cry at them. So, you know.
Yes.
Well, Miss Loresa, thank you so much for joining us. If I could, I've got to speak at a college retreat this weekend. So if I could get that manuscript, you know, 8 months early, I would have my lessons done. But to help us and our audience get to know our guest a little bit better, we're going to ask you a fun question, maybe two. The one I want to ask you, because this is what I love and it helps me get to know people better. You're driving down the road, windows down. What is the one song that you're just going to sing, embarrass yourself at the red light in front of everybody else?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is really old school, but I'm going to go with Benny and the Jets with Elton John.
It's a great one.
It's just hard to beat that song, right?
It is on my running playlist, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I just think of Andy Bernard from The Office, you know, when I think of Benny and the Jets.
Yes.
I'll save everybody. I'll spare everybody the rendition. But we are so thankful. Will mentioned it. We're so thankful you took time to be with us. We know that we, as I often say, we all need a counselor. And it's tremendous that sometimes we get caught up with counselors and we think, oh, they're going to judge us. They're going to do this. But you all have the struggles, and the struggle is what kind of makes you makes us all a expert at dealing with certain things. If you've come through it, it's kind of given you the ability to speak on it. And so we're thankful that you're with us. Would you tell us one more time where we can get your book, the title, so that the folks listening at home can get their hands on that?
Sure, yeah. So the book that I published for parents that have children with special needs, and also I would say not just parents, the people who've read it said really everyone needs to read this. Teachers, anyone that works with or loves someone with special needs. But it's called No More Chasing Normal, and you can find it on Amazon.
Do you have a website where people can go? I know they may want to find you. There may be people who are struggling in our area who want to see you as a counselor. So what's your website?
Yes, it is www.stansellcounseling.com.
And I'll be sure to put that down in the description along with the link to get your book. And we will certainly be looking to have you back on in the near future.
That would be great. And I will also say, if anyone wants to see the TED Talk, it's also on my website. You know, maybe they're too busy, they don't have time to get the book, or they want to get it later. But the TED Talk is just a 16, 17-minute talk that they could listen to.
All right. Well, thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.